Welcome everyone to this episode of the Salon of Classical Architecture. We are having here today. This is the pre-last class of the year. We will have another class next week, and then we will close up for Christmas. There have been some changes in the calendar, but today we're having a special guest, a good friend of mine, Alexandre Kiss, who is a Brazilian architect who lives in London, has been living in London for a long time, and he's going to give us a very interesting lecture today about what is traditional architecture. And then, as usual, we will follow the same scheme as we follow in every of our episode or sessions. We will have the lecture, then we will have the question time, and if you want to bring your project, we will bring it. We will do some announcements as usual, and then we will close up. So, Alex, the screen and the scene is yours. I'm going to share, click everyone, and you can start whenever you want.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. Good evening. It's evening here in the UK. So this is the second time I present this lecture. It's based on an article that I wrote, and it was published in the Brazilian Interbau magazine and also in the Planning Herald. And okay, let's do it. I wrote this article actually because I noticed that there are like many of us architects, we don't think very much about the groundings for.
Sorry, I have unmuted you. Sorry, you need to unmute. Alex, sorry,
You muted me. Okay, let's start over
sorry.
again. Where did you lose me?
When you started, because I was
okay. So yeah, okay. So let's do it. So I wrote this article to explain to, well, architects are usually, like most of us, I believe, we're not very philosophical. We just like what we like and we do what we do. And it is important, especially because we are in a minority position, it is important that we understand where we are so we can advance our beliefs, the way, what we want to do, what we believe is right, because obviously there will be resistance to us. Since we're in a minority position, the establishment is against us. Unfortunately, that's a reality. So I find it very important that we understand what are the main philosophical positions, philosophical defenses, I would say, justifications that traditional architects have been using to justify their position. So this is basically what the goal of the article is. So you can investigate. You will probably find yourself like agreeing with one of these points of views. In the article, I try not to be as neutral as possible, not to state my position, but I do have one of them, and we can discuss that after. I'm not trying to hide it. I'm just trying to be neutral so you can figure it out for yourself. So, okay, I guess that's the idea. So let's start. So basically, we're talking about tradition, and tradition. It's a word that comes from Latin, from the Latin noun traditio. If you like the restored pronunciation, if you're picky about these things, they would say traditio. And this comes from the verb tradere, which means to hand over. So there is something, the traditum, that is passed from someone representing the older generation to someone representing the younger generation, to whom the traditum is confided, and who in due course must pass it on to the next generation. So basically there is this is a basic idea of the tradition. It's the opposite of critical thinking. You just have something that is given to you, you keep it, and you pass it on to the next generation, and so on and so on and so on. This is the idea of tradition. So the traditum can be many things, can be an object, a habit, a craft, a social or political arrangement, knowledge. It must be preserved unchanged from generation to generation to ensure that the current custodian must recognize the importance of the traditum itself, or at least to recognize the authority of the community to which the tradition belongs. So basically, that's a collective project. So you do that for the community. So there is something that is important. You keep it with you unchanged and you pass it on. So this is what tradition is. So these ideas were like of stating what tradition is. They come from religion originally. So basically, there is some knowledge, some object of cult or something like that that is passed on. Which is that's the idea of a tradition. Well, okay, this is the more formal idea of tradition, but this is how people use tradition actually on an everyday basis, much looser. So in many ways, people just pass on like anything that has some antiquity is passed on as tradition. So we talk about traditional architecture as opposed to architectural traditions that are not usually counted as tradition. And we say, for example, the Notre Dame cathedral in France is traditional, whereas Ronchamp Chapel, Ronchamp, Le Corbusier is not traditional, even if one is part of the Gothic tradition and the other one is part of the modernist tradition. So there is a modernist tradition after all, right? So this is slightly confusing because we want to say that traditional architecture is not modernism. This is the most basic intuition that we have, doing something that is not modernism. So, but the modernists themselves, they do have a tradition. They do have like their own like standards, that stuff that are passed on. We don't want to say that that's traditional. So finally, we have to find out what is it that we're passing on. What is this traditum that we're passing on from one generation to another? What is this that we're passing on that counts as traditional? That's important that we recognize as being traditional. So I have found like that there are like basically three different currents in our circles, contemporary circles of traditional architecture, that used to defend traditional architecture, justify traditional architecture. So some believe that traditional architecture means being informed by a metaphysical principle that grounds everything that exists correspondingly. And anti-traditional practice is one from which this principle is absent. So yeah, so there is a metaphysical principle that must be passed on. We're going to talk about this tradition. The second one is believes that traditional is something that underlies successful human experiences, something that can be empirically found by identifying and investigating successful past human practices and human nature. And so in this second, I have broken down this in two different outlooks. So there is one of them that's more scientifically minded, and the other one is more sociologically minded. So there you have the three traditions, the one that is concerned with metaphysics, the second one with more sociologically minded, historically minded, and the third one is more empirically minded, scientifically minded. So, and then you have the skeptics, the people who kind of hold a negative view of tradition. They are the modernists, basically, or the thinkers behind the modernists, people who have a negative view of tradition. They believe that they tend to believe that things that have been received from previous generations must be able to be discarded in face of new conditions. They tend to be suspicious of tradition, as it may be carrying into the present past forms that are harmful to the current ways of life. Okay, I don't think that I don't intend that these views that I have enumerated here are that they be exhaustive, but I believe that they are the most commonly held. So this is that there were like other views, for example, in the 19th century. I haven't mentioned that, but in the 19th century, for example, you think about William Morris. So he has a view of tradition that is linked to socialism, the Middle Ages, the work conditions that had disappeared with the guilds and so on, were being replaced by the Industrial Revolution. So this is a possibility. There aren't many people like defending traditional architecture, to my mind. There aren't many people at this point that have been defending traditional architecture from this perspective. So I didn't say anything about it, but you can look it up. Like if you find that that's an interesting way of defending traditional architecture. So basically, let's start. The first group that I mentioned are the Metaphysicians. So the Metaphysicians are the oldest stance that Western architects have adopted. Some version of this view can be found in Vitruvius, Alberti, Palladio. It was the dominant view from antiquity until the early modern period. I think if we had to pick a date to point its loss of preeminence, we would choose the quarrel of the ancients and the moderns in the 17th century France, that are represented by the controversies between François Blondel and on the side of the ancients and Claude Perrault on the side of the moderns. So famously, like Claude Perrault, it's kind of this controversy is mainly like a literary controversy, but there was like some manifestations of it in the architectural community, and Claude Perrault is famously said that he believed that architecture is basically, he was kind of starting to introduce the relativist view. It's a cultural thing, it's a social construction, and things like that. I speak about that in another article, but no, let's not get too much into it. But this is when it starts. Like skepticism starts to creep in, and Perrault says, "Oh, classical architecture is great." He loved it. He was a great classicist. If you don't know Claude Perrault, he was the guy who designed the east facade for the Louvre Palace, now the museum. So one of the most famous elevations in history. And it's beautiful. It's absolutely extraordinary. But he believed that that there was no like transcendental grounds for the success of classical architecture. It was part of a social construction. Perhaps it's something to do with human nature, but it was everything was very contingent, I suppose. I think it talks about these things in his preface to his translation to Vitruvius. Anyway, so the people who defend this nowadays, the people who defend the metaphysical views, are traditionally like in the West, the Platonists, the Neoplatonists, and the Thomists, Aristotelians. But there is a kind of a more like a modern current that will kind of invite non-Western traditions, especially the people who are like the traditionalists, or the René Guénon, and his. So you find that amongst the community. I think some people might be interested. I've been reading that tradition of René Guénon. I don't know if you know René Guénon. He was a very famous French thinker, late 19th century, early 20th century, and he introduced this school called the traditional school. And so basically one of the things that they believed is that there was this kind of a original, like metaphysical outlook that are represented symbolically by the religions. Some religions, not all, but it would include, for example, not only Christianity in its Catholic version, but also the Islam in its Sufi interpretation, Neoplatonist things like Al-Arabi, the Kabbalah, the Jewish Kabbalah would be part of that. symbolic representation of this metaphysical of this metaphysics, Hinduism with the Advaita Vedanta, Taoism. So all these schools would be like representing. So this is somewhat, you will find like traditional architects today that are interested in that. It's in that view, who are coming from this school, René. And you'll also find like Thomists, people interested in the thought of St. Thomas Aquinas, Catholics. They usually will support that view. That think that classical architecture, mainly classical architecture, I would say that they're not so much interested in vernacular architecture, to my mind, but mainly classical architecture can and should be justified by this metaphysics, classical metaphysics, which is Platonist / Aristotelian metaphysics in the West. In the East, he would have like all these other variants that I've the Al-Arabi for the Muslims anyway, other thinkers. So basically, these people believe that reality is grounded on a necessary principle that functions as cause to the existence of everything and provide the archetypes, the forms towards which everything evolves. There must be a principle like this because of the ultimate intelligibility of all that exists. So that's the principle of sufficient reason for those familiar with philosophy. Everything has a cause or an explanation. This is famously stated by Leibniz, but it's found in the older tradition of Plato, Aristotle, and so on. It's a metaphysical principle, the principle of sufficient reason. So if there was something that existed without a cause, it would be groundless and therefore unintelligible. This is a way that I found to state this principle. So since everything is intelligible, there must be a cause. Because the forms specify the nature of particular objects, the essences and perfections, they must be contained somehow on this principle. Otherwise, they would be coming from nothing. So this is one of those famous proofs of the existence of God. And I'm just suggesting some. I have no time to go into it. It's just suggesting. But this principle is called the first cause. It contains everything that can exist or could exist and sustain the actually existing beings at each moment. This principle is commonly identified with God, with the God of religion, but its truth can be achieved, so its proponents claim, by rational investigation alone, regardless of revelation. So this is something that people don't know. These traditions, these religious traditions, like Catholicism in its Thomistic outlook, or some version of Islam, they believe that the existence of God can be proved rationally. It's not part of revelation. It's just by rational argument you arrive at the existence of God. In the West, it's famously like the five ways of St. Thomas Aquinas, for example, that sort of thing. This is basically what's behind what I'm suggesting here. More suggesting than making a case for it, because there's no space. So here I explain a little bit of how Aristotle interpreted it, but it's a fact that can be ascertained by experience that all beings around us change. They change internally by perfecting themselves, changing towards their respective archetypes, and externally by playing the role ascribed to them in the order of things. Since the archetype of any perfection is contained in the first cause, by perfecting themselves, things approach the first cause. So the first cause is in the beginning and in the end of things. So things come from the first cause and move back to the first cause. So this is basically, another way to say it is that things are ordered to their own good. It's all very complicated. I'm just giving you like the idea that things spring from this first principle that the religions call God, and they go back to God by imitating God or trying to approach them, their archetypes that are contained ultimately in God. Neoplatonists believe that they're not actually contained in God, but these archetypes exist like in themselves. Well, anyway, so traditional is whatever humans make and do, and what is ordered to the first cause. This is basically what tradition is. So tradition has to have that direction. This is what René Guénon, I think, wrote about tradition. The modern Western world is said to be profane or anti-tradition because its culture is disconnected to the higher principle and instead grounded on something lower that belongs to the material world. So they will talk a lot about the descent into matter or into quantity, which is dispersion, rather than going back to the one. So, okay, that's all very abstract. I don't imagine that everyone is into metaphysics, but I'll give you an illustration of how it happens. Interpretation via an interpretation that I made of a little bit unorthodox of the Vitruvius trinity, like the firmitas, utilitas, and venustas. So firmitas can be thought as the material base. Utilitas corresponds to the part of the function that does not involve contemplation. That is the control of the access of the elements and living beings to the building in order to accommodate a given human activity. And venustas corresponds to the part of the function that involves contemplation, the symbolic aspect of architecture. So this symbolic aspect of architecture, I'll repeat what I've just done. I divided, so firmitas and utilitas, they correspond of the material part of architecture. Utilitas would be like the function, as the modernists understand it, and venustas is the symbolic part of architecture. So architecture has this double end, one on top of each other. That's the kind of respond to the requirements of use, but also it has like a symbolic dimension, which Vitruvius calls venustas, which commonly translated as beauty, but I think that's a little bit problematic. Anyway, at a worldly level, the building will possess a moral character. Just as a man should act in harmony with his environment, the building can be in symbolic harmony with its context, expressing appropriately its position in the institutional hierarchy by a correct use of the relevant symbolic repertoire that may be obtained from a style. So this is very important. This is saying that architecture, one of the goals of architecture is to represent character, which is the moral aspect of the building. So a public building must look like a public building because it has like occupies a certain it has a certain role to play among the other buildings in the city. Same goes for a residential building. Same goes for a church and so on. So each building has to represent its function. That was very common. I mean, Alexandre Kiss speaks a little bit about that. Anyway, so this is one of the things that you will find. This moral aspect of architecture, people will talk about it. But then, this is the most basic. So if you go up in the hierarchy of a symbolic hierarchy, remember that if it's got a moral character, if anything that's got a moral character is a free being, and a free being is a rational agent, because moral agency implies rationality, and man, according to the Metaphysicians definition, is the rational animal, the only material being endowed with reason and will. And so to suggest the presence of human life, the symbolic resources such as bilateral symmetry may be used, and any life recalls the correspondence of the parts through forms and proportions. The component parts can be perceived as independent elements among themselves through its forms and proportions, symbolizing the cosmos as an ordered whole. So you see that it goes like getting more complicated. So you represent a life. Through this life, you represent some rationality. through this rationality, you represent the character that the building has to have. And this symbol it's a sign. A symbol is a sign, a form of sign that is partly like arbitrary and partly natural, but it's constructed that there is kind of obviously a social constructional aspect to any symbol that architecture can carry. But obviously, the goal of architecture goes representing life, and through life, it represents the cosmos as kind of a whole that works in harmony. And through the cosmos, you represent the origin of the cosmos and God. So everything is represented in a certain hierarchy of things. So this is so the several levels of meaning, ever more abstract, belong to the nature of the symbol, since they are signs that make reference to archetypes, making present in the sensible world the superior levels of reality. And this is something that you will read a lot in traditional philosophy. The idea that the symbol represents the superior levels of reality, not only our level, like morality, human beings, but also like levels that are metaphysically superior, such as God and things, immaterial beings. So a building will be traditional if its symbolic system is aligned with the place ascribed to it in the order of the cosmos, but also if its other material requirements mentioned above fit that order. So it will, for a building to be traditional, ultimately, it will have to exist in a traditional society. So some people can be very radical and say, well, traditional architecture is impossible because you haven't got a traditional society. So this is the most radical, the most ancient view of traditional architecture. Though I would say this is not the most common one. The other two views that I'm going to talk about now are, I believe, more common. The second view, which I mentioned, that the sociological view, I call them in the article the Burkean Conservatives. So these are the people who, I think the most famous name behind this view is Roger Scruton. If you are into like traditional architecture, you've certainly heard of Roger Scruton. A very important defender of traditional architecture ever since the beginning. Roger Scruton was a philosopher, born in 1944, I believe. He died like in early 2020, and he was extremely influential. He was behind the beautiful city, right? What is it? Can't remember. The UK government here, we had like a. So yeah. Anyway, so this view was articulated recently, perhaps no earlier than than in the 1970s. It's made popular by architects and theoreticians involved in the revival of classicism known as New Classical Movement, which was born from the rubbles of postmodernism. Its adherents tend to share the Enlightenment concern with classical metaphysics, perceived as dogmatic, accepting postulates empirically. That is, the dogmatic because they accept postulates that are empirically ungrounded. They are reached only through reasoning, common sense. This is the idea of metaphysics, and they are kind of the Enlightenment, like one of the origins of Enlightenment philosophy is precisely fighting Aristotle, as many of you know, right? As Thomas Hobbes and the early modern philosophers were into like discrediting Aristotle. So Aristotle is one of the main representatives of the previous view that we were talking about, the Metaphysicians. So its proponents believe that what distinguishes traditional architecture from non-traditional are principles to be found in sensible experience rather than metaphysics. So Burkean Conservatives look for these principles in the nature of social interaction. Empiricists seek it in the method of producing architecture, remaining agnostic as to its relevance to other human endeavors. So Burkean conservatism, the Burkean conservatism itself, not what we're talking about. So they're coming from an older tradition that goes back to a man called Edmund Burke, who was a philosopher, Irish philosopher. His father was part of the ascendancy. His mother was Catholic, and he was from Dublin, lived in the late 18th century, and he wrote a book about aesthetics, and eventually he became a member of parliament, an MP in London, initially for Somerset, I believe, Bristol maybe, and then they gave him, like, because he had problems there, they gave him like a rotten borough called Sarum, actually, that Pablo and I had the pleasure to visit. Old Sarum, still there. It's a rotten borough, for those who are not from the UK, is something that used to exist up until the early 19th century, which is constituencies with a minimum amount of people living in there, and he could elect they could elect an MP. Old Sarum was one of them, and like a few people living there. I don't know how many, I can't remember. But yeah, so Burke was elected member of parliament because otherwise he would lose his seat. So they fixed this solution for him. Anyway, Burke that was before the party system as we know started, but they still have like some trends inside parliament. One of the trends was the Tories, more conservative, linked to, and then you had the Whigs, which were the high nobility people who descended from the people who supported William of Orange and so on. So Burke was a Whig. That was his faction. He was himself against party politics, but that was so. He wrote a pamphlet called "The Reflections on the Revolution in France" in 1790, just after the French Revolution. The revolution was still going. So the year of the revolution starts in 1789, so the king was still alive, and it was kind of early days of the revolution. So you still had they were still trying to think about the constitutional monarchy for France and the models of the UK. And so he writes this pamphlet, which is not a pamphlet at all, actually. It's a very long book. Yeah, and it's known as to be the founding document of British conservatism. But many of the ideas of Burke can be traced to Aristotle's writings on ethics and politics. It implicitly recognizes that there are traditional societies and non-traditional societies. Only the former, there is the traditional societies, are conducive to the good life. This form of Burkean theory of tradition, follows from the Burkean theory of tradition as embodied social knowledge. I think it's Roger Scruton's term, this embodied social knowledge. This type of knowledge arises from the free interaction of the members of a society over generations in search for agreement. It can be found in law, in politics, in religion, in the arts, etc. If these spontaneous interactions are disrupted, this knowledge will not emerge and society will be anti-traditional in that respect. This can happen, for example, when a critical stance, and this is in quotes, a critical stance, so they don't think that there is such a thing. Burkeans will mock the idea of critical philosophy, puts a tradition under suspicion because some incidental aspects of it is found unbecoming. Without understanding the nature of traditional knowledge, he seeks to replace it with some rationalistic design that lacks the required knowledge in principle. So people find that some habits, some way of making things inside of society. They don't understand the reasons. They can't find the reasons, and they imagine because they can't find the reason, there are no reasons. But what they're saying is actually the reasons were discovered over generations. They're not there for inspection. So there must be like a presumption in favor of the traditional ways of doing, because if you take them out, we can't rebuild them again, because it takes like the interaction over generations to recreate it. So this is basically the idea. So Roger Scruton, he gives an account of how architecture can embody traditional knowledge. And this, you can find this in his little book, which is a wonderful book called Beauty. It's it's on that collection, a very short introduction to I think it's a very short introduction to beauty. Is that the name? Little collection, Oxford University Press. So first he postulates a sense of beauty as an inborn capacity to track, that we have an inborn capacity to track beauty in experience. Then he explains how this sense works in relation to architecture and design. There are possibly many equivalent ways to build in conformity to practical requirements. To choose one, we search for what looks right. If others disagree with us, we give reasons for our view to persuade them. We think that it should be bigger, or that proportions are wrong. Over time, the consensus around the aesthetically acceptable solution will arise, forming styles that belong to the community that created it. These styles are used as the background and model for new invention that will respond to our desire to fit in, reinforcing established tradition, or to stand out if propriety requires it. There are also anti-traditional ways of standing out, typically through repealing traditional practices that are standing in the way of a rationalistic plan and replacing them with some novelty in order to propel actions that will foster some ideological goal, such as liberation, the nation, progress, etc. So this is evidently detrimental to the building up of traditional knowledge. This is what Scruton uses Wittgenstein to illustrate that. But this is basically when you look at something and say, "Oh, this is looking good, don't you think so? Oh, I don't know," and you kind of come with some standard solutions. Perhaps this is the origin of all styles, of all like healthy styles. And then you look at it, it looks right. Eventually, it looks right, or it doesn't look right. If it looks right, you keep the solution. If it doesn't look right, you get rid of it. So this is what an expression that Roger Scruton uses a lot. You look for what looks right. It can be anything. It can be a behavior. It can be clothes. Can be manners. Can be interiors. Can be architecture. Can be new. It looks right. This sounds right. This looks right. It doesn't look right, and you kind of eventually, by agreeing on what looks right, you come with styles, with inventory of solutions, of aesthetic solutions that are there to be used by the next generations, and it's accumulated over time. So this is possibly like this is how like classical architecture was born. The language was born over time. Like, oh, this looks right. This doesn't look right. Blah, blah, blah. So you're saying like traditionalists, the rationalists. The rationalists are the enemies of the conservatives. So the rationalists are the people who discard these traditions because they don't understand. So they replace with some novelty, something new, but which is eventually ideological. And by ideological, I mean something that is exists exclusively to propel a course of action. There's no relation to truth, ideology in that sense. This is not the Marxist sense of ideology. This is another but very common meaning of the word. So ideology as a set of beliefs that you want to instill in others so that they will be convinced to pursue some sort of course of action that the ideologue thinks is desirable. So it has nothing to do with truth. So there's a problem with that, obviously, right? Because, I mean, many traditions exist and not all traditions are worth preserving. But because of the nature of the workings of traditional knowledge, there is a presumption in favor of existing ones. After all, human interactions uninterrupted by the ideological interference lead to traditional knowledge. Admittedly, normal interactions are sometimes disrupted. So how can we recognize if a tradition is healthy? You have traditions such as modernism, for example, that is, Roger Scruton will be the first to say, that is unhealthy. It's not conducive to the good life. So how do you recognize? It is a tradition after all, right? People like spent like generations saying that this is right, this is wrong, this looks right, this is a solution that we like, this is a solution that we don't like. But they had like some vice of origin that stopped them from. So Roger Scruton, I believe, in his last book, what's his last book? An Invitation to Conservatism. I think he introduces like some Aristotelian elements, which interestingly like made some nods to the metaphysicians to explain what to have something beyond this traditional philosophy, which eventually, in his youth, I have the impression it was almost a relativist, almost like a postmodernist, but eventually he was flirting with Aristotelianism to find some more concrete groundings to judge between traditions. So if you go to his writings from the 1980s and 90s, you will find that he was kind of almost flirting with relativism, and then in the last he talks about Aristotle, which I found interesting. But so he begins with the conservatives, and not only Roger Scruton, many do that. They begin with the philosophical anthropology, with which a tradition can be measured. Commonly an Aristotelian conception of human rationality. For Aristotle, free choice consists in accepting or refusing what is proposed with probability, but with necessity by the intellect. For example, we don't choose to believe in mathematical truths. They impose themselves on us by their own nature. But when we choose a certain course of action for thinking it the best, even if certainty is not available, we do it freely. Choice is ultimately rational, but it's influenced by the passions or the emotions. Passions is the old word for emotions. And because of it, they must be habituated to incline in the appropriate direction. Our emotions can get in the way of right reason, but they can also urge it. This alignment of the passions with what should be done according to our nature is virtue. Aristotelian rationality allows conservatives to claim a middle ground between idealism, where history is completely determined by thought, and materialism, where history is completely determined by material factors and thoughts. So basically, this is Aristotle. I mean, I don't know, Aristotle is kind of key to how traditional morality arose in the West, at least, and I believe in the Middle East as well, not only in the West. But so basically, Aristotle believes that we are, the idea is that we're free beings, we have material conditions, and the material conditions, they will offer up possibilities to us. So they will limit our possibilities. You can only do what the material conditions allow you to do, but you have many options. So, and the options of what to do can be chosen freely by you. So it's not only the ideas, because you're limited by the material conditions, they guide you in a way, and they give you also the goal of your life. So Aristotle, the goal of life is given by your nature, not by what you want to do. Your nature as a creature that was made to know, that's what you have to do to be happy. So it's not up to you. You choose the means, you don't choose the ends. And this is what Aristotle is saying. So I'm comparing that to Marxists, for example, that think that material conditions we're just dragged by the material conditions in a kind of a caricature of Marxism, but there's some truth in it. Or the idealists that believe they're completely free, and well, not only the idealists, there are many people who existentialists. I think we invent ourselves. Sartre, they used to say like that existence precedes essence, and therefore you just invent your essence, you create yourself. So this would be that radical. So Aristotelians have a middle ground between these two views. This is what I'm saying. So anyway, let's continue. Yeah. So following Aristotle's observation, conservatives believe that humans need societies for material provision and safety, and for guaranteeing peaceful competition. Human beings are equipped with emotional needs, such as attachments that impel them to form societies, notably the family. For the aforementioned reasons, however, they will refrain from designing an ideal society to accommodate human nature. The elements that allow for a good social order to flourish are inherently traditional, because to sustain this social order, they must already be part of it. So what is required to detect traditional elements already present in society and start from them? For Burkean conservatives, then, tradition are the practices arising in societies with the moral dispositions to produce traditional knowledge. So you will notice that here it's pretty much as the same one. Traditional architecture will exist inside a traditional society, ultimately. So if a society is not traditional, you will have a hard time producing traditional architecture, because you don't have the conditions to produce traditional knowledge, which is that knowledge that I was talking about, which is the interaction over the ages. That there must be like people must be free from ideology to be able to produce. This is the idea. They must be free from ideology to produce traditional knowledge. If you are contaminated by ideology, you will not produce traditional knowledge. This is basically the idea here. So our society, since it's deeply ideological, does not produce traditional knowledge, it produces ideology. So modernism is part of that. It's just part of this ideological outlook. So this was the Burkean Conservatives, the last school of defenders. I think this is very popular with our American friends, mostly. In England, I believe that Burkean conservatives are the majority. I don't think the metaphysicians are the majority anywhere, but they exist everywhere in America and here in England as well, which are the countries that I know more of. But so the empiricists, they tend to emphasize the importance of tradition as the appropriate method for the production of architectural knowledge, but they refrain from making overarching claims about its relevance to other domains. So this is important. The empiricists, what I'm calling the empiricists, they talk only about traditional architecture. So if you notice, like the Burkean conservatives, they have a whole outlook of society, and traditional knowledge works like organically in every domain of society. The empiricists, they tend to emphasize the importance of tradition just for the production of architectural knowledge. They are kind of they won't say anything about other domains. They don't anyway. So they tend to adopt the materialist perspective. This is very common. The materialists, modern materialists, they are the most in tune with the modern world, I would say, at least methodologically. That relies on careful observation and on the scientific method. This methodological naturalism dictates the human anthropology that they will use to judge the soundness of tradition, which will be an anthropology endorsed by modern scientists. So they typically care a lot about things like cognitive psychology, evolutionary psychology, that sort of thing. The human anthropologies that are trendy in modern universities. And that have like behind them materialist metaphysics. So empiricists tend to polemicize with the constructivists. The constructivists here are those who believe that human nature is socially constructed. The postmodernists, for example, by defending the existence of a stable human nature. The case against it, they claim, relies largely on marginal instances. But a good investigation depends on typical rather than marginal instances. As the empiricists believe good architecture produces a healthy environment, which means that it's healthy for the user, understood from a scientific perspective. So basically, traditional architecture is healthy. It's good for you because it's good for your well-being, almost like from a medical perspective. They also claim that the modernists' erroneous understanding of the role of tradition in the formation of architectural styles, combined with the reforming impetus, led to an unwarranted discard of traditional ways of building that, in spite of the fact that they are products of a pre-scientific era, They still incorporate much knowledge as they were produced using reliable methods and respecting empirical questions. So you see, like the connection with the Burkean Conservatives. So the methods are reliable because they arose. So this is similar to Burkean conservatism. And you can see here a trend, like the Metaphysicians are the strongest claim, and the other ones are weaker and weaker. And you have to commit to less and less to defend traditional architecture. So this approach is easy for you to convince your average client, because the clients, it's going to be very hard for you to make a metaphysical case to them, like, oh, let's talk about St. Thomas Aquinas. Let's talk about Neoplatonism. Or classical architecture is great because Neoplatonism is true. I mean, it's just something that it probably won't have the opportunity to do. Well, anyway, this trend was inaugurated, to my mind, by Jane Jacobs in a 1961 book, Death and Life of Great American Cities. Jane Jacobs was a journalist. She was not an architect, but she wrote a very famous book, which mainly, I assume that most of you are architects, you must have read this book in university, or at least should have read this book in university. It's a very important book that is kind of a landmark in modern urban design. And while she was not, Jane Jacobs herself, recognized as an unqualified defender of tradition, she threw the first blows against the modernists by comparing unfavorably the new social housing experiments that were appearing in the outskirts of American cities with the traditional working class neighborhoods. Those she uses, for example, in Boston. She talks about the traditional neighborhoods in American cities. I think she was from Boston, but she was in New York actually, but she uses Boston as well. She goes to great length to show that the new architecture was successful because it had failed to understand how humans respond to the built environment. Another one is Christopher Alexander. There are probably a couple of fans of Alexander here. They're always around. And he was a very important architect. He wrote a book, and he was influential. With the modernists before this one, before he became like this defender of tradition. But eventually, he became like one of the most important thinkers behind the revival of traditional architecture. So he was more programmatic, and he followed the path of Jane Jacobs in a more programmatic way by attempting at systematizing the patterns that underlie traditional ways of building in a timeless way of building. A very interesting book. I recommend that everyone should read this book. Alexander dismisses the possibility of a new language being created for architecture from scratch. The trouble is that, quote, this is Alexander saying, in our times, we have come to think of architecture as creations conceived in the minds of creators. However, this is the end of the quote. However, architecture depends on a predicate that Alexander calls the quality without a name, the presence of which determines its excellence. This is because, and I'm going to read from Alexander here. This is because, quote, the quality without a name, like all forms of organic wholeness, depends essentially on degrees of adaptation of the parts to the whole. In a system that approaches the character of nature, the parts must be adapted with an almost infinite degree of subtlety. And this requires that the whole process of adaptation be going through the system constantly. And this is the end of the quote. The language generated by this organic process can be identified, systematized, and taught. And this is what Alexander will attempt in his book, A Pattern Language, Towns, Buildings, and Constructions. I'm sure all architects have come across this building at some point. It's a chunky book. It's been translated to many languages. Another one is Nikos Alingaros, our friend. He works to the necessity, he vindicates the necessity of subjecting architectural theory to the scientific method. And more recently, Anne Sussman and Justin Hollander defended the explicit adoption of an evolutionary human anthropology, embracing the latest findings in the related research fields, and more generally, a fully fledged scientific approach to try to understand the success of traditional building practices when compared to modern ones. So these are the three strands. So the third one is more scientific, but it has some links to traditional ways of especially when you read Alexander, he has he has like a Burkean vein there, running there, when he talks about traditional knowledge, but the human anthropology that they use is usually like modern psychology, basically, cognitive psychology, evolutionary psychology. This is the human anthropology. Whereas the Burkeans are usually more traditional in the sense that they prefer Aristotle and traditional anthropologies rather than the modern scientific ones. And the metaphysicians are the full-on thing. They want the whole metaphysical thing with it. So these are the three currents that I find. I don't know. I would say that we're repeating, like in the UK, the Burkean Conservatives are probably more common or were more common. And in America, probably the empiricists are more common, not exclusively in any way. You'll find like people defending. And the metaphysicians, they're both in America and in the UK, but they are a minority in both places, even though they exist. They're mainly like either Guénonian traditionalists or Catholics in general. And then who are we talking against? It is important. What do the modernists think? Because if you're trying to defend a traditional architecture, you have to have an idea of what people who oppose traditional architecture think. So obviously, so to situate the debate, I will mention two very influential anti-traditional views. One is modernism, which views the present as the measure to judge things past, and the other is postmodernism, which believes that human nature is a product of its historical context. So let's talk about modernism first. So modernism has been around for longer, and it is associated with the Enlightenment view that first principles can be found from which an optimal arrangement of life and society can be deduced. Think of the French Revolution, for example. In architecture, views in its vicinity were proposed famously by members of the first generation of modernists, such as Le Corbusier, and in general corresponds to the functionalist trends that sought to rearrange society and architecture according to first principles, regardless of tradition. They commonly denounce traditional architecture as masking, with ornament and artificial arrangements, the structural and material needs of functional architecture. So this is kind of, at least in my generation, we used to hear that a lot, like this. You need the truth of structural honesty and the truth of materials. It was kind of a standard phrase that modernists used to discredit past ways of doing architecture, because they falsify the material requirements and all that sort of thing, like things that are basically superstitions or prejudices. It's very similar to what Enlightenment thinkers used to think of religion, like it as a superstition. And so this is one of the views, like very common with the modernists. Another view is historicism. So historicism was born as a reaction to the a priorism of the Enlightenment. With a priorism, I mean that the thing that you can find these things a priori outside of history, outside of anything, which is still to them like a holdover from metaphysics. So previously, many historicists adopted a Hegelian outlook. Hegelian is from Hegel, a German 18th and 19th century philosopher, very important philosopher. And he tries to explain the change in style throughout history and justify modernism in particular by defending that good art should express the spirit of times, which is what modernism was supposed to be doing, expressing well the spirit of time. If you express, everyone expresses the spirit of time if you're doing something, but if you express well the spirit of time, especially the direction of change, then you're doing good art. This is the idea. So modernism is doing precisely that. And traditional architecture is not. It's reactionary. It doesn't understand where it's going. It's kind of trying to cling to the past, and it's just not very good. So when we this view is very common with architectural historians of the early 20th century. For example, Nikolaus Pevsner, who had a very long and successful career here in the UK. And then from this view comes the accusations that traditional architecture falsifies history. Everyone heard that before. Okay, so this is it. You're just doing something that doesn't belong to now. It's reactionary, it's false, it's confusing. You should understand where history is leading us, as if history had like a life of its own, and express this direction to enlighten people about where we're going, our destination, what's next. So obviously this is the theory, a theory that encourages the avant-garde, right? So more recently, historicists have adopted a more radical stance that can be traced to Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud. Karl Marx, Nietzsche, I think everyone knows who he is, and Freud is the father of psychoanalysis. And now more recently, Foucault and Derrida included in those, they expose existing traditions as concealers of unconfessed agendas. So there is almost like conspiratorial idea that the existing tradition must be exposed because they are we have to get into Marxism now, but I'm not going to do that. This happens, they believe, because they are products of oppressive impulses for control. So basically the idea, now I'll say something about it. So the idea is that in Marx, I think it's the clearest or the more, as Marx thinks that all these things are part of the superstructure. The base is the economy that goes moving forward. And the superstructure is basically ideology. So it includes like religion, art, and all that. And so what traditional architecture is doing for Marx, for example, although Marx didn't write anything about that as far as I know, but a Marxist might say that it's hiding the workings of the base, the real workings of society, which is class struggle. It's hiding the fact that the working class, the proletariat, is being exploited by the owners of the means of production. This is basically the idea. So it's not only misleading, but it's evil. Traditional architecture is evil. Adorno developed a theory. Adorno is one of the perhaps the most important thinker of what people call critical theory, perhaps the Frankfurt School. There's something that we had to read in university when I was studying. It's probably the most important aestheticians of that tradition in the 20th century, I think. And he developed a theory that defends the avant-garde as a tool to break out from the traps of tradition by showing possibilities not yet realized, which could point out to unexplored territories of freedom, which is by definition freedom from tradition, is possible. So basically, the idea of Adorno is good art is not only art that expresses the spirit of time, but avant-garde art that breaks with the spirit of time, that shows other possibilities, because the society must be submitted to constant criticism, hence critical theory, exposing the tools of domination, so this is basically art is there to kind of show all the possibilities. So if you leave things to accommodate for themselves, they will eventually accommodate in oppressive relations. And the avant-garde is there as a social destiny to free people from oppression. This is basically what the avant-garde should do. Much of postmodern architecture and contemporary art follows this lead, if it's intellectual enough, obviously, right? From this view comes a suspicion that traditional architecture promotes authoritarianism. So you see that the modernists used to think that traditional architecture uh, was bad because it was falsifying, was not in accordance to some principles that could be deduced, and so therefore it was not good. It's more close to the kind of the rationalism from the French Revolution. Now, the second criticism, which is closer to postmodernism, is kind of more aggressive, and they think traditional architecture is probably promoting authoritarianism. This is what they think. So basically, this is it. I think my conclusion is pretty much what I said in the introduction, that traditional architecture has many defenders, but they are a minority, and because of that, its proponents will be challenged. So it is important that its defenders go beyond identifying and appreciating traditional buildings, that they can situate their views inside a larger frame inside which tradition can thrive. The views for traditional architecture enumerated by myself can, of course, find many common grounds and compromises among themselves. We've spoken about it, like there are commonalities and differences between these three views. But I think they are ultimately incompatible because they deny very important things that the other views are proposing. So yes, it's the task of us architects to seek for appropriate grounds to defend traditional architecture. And these grounds, as I said, there can be others than those discussed here. I don't pretend to be exhaustive, but yes, it's definitely worth defending traditional architecture, finding out about these views, and this will open your minds to understand new perspective on your life in the world. Yeah, that's it. It can only be worth it. Thank you very much. And that was my presentation. I hope you liked it. If you got any questions?
Thank you, Alex. I think it was a great presentation. I think we have some comments that Christian made. Christian, if you are here, I think it would be great if you elaborate them a little bit because they're very interesting. I think the only thing I'm going to comment in one of your comments that you have said, that the first one, the saying that the metaphysicians are quite popular on that online, and Jordan Peterson first with popularity gave attention to a few of his personal friends that gave a decent following, like the iconographer Jogan Pajot, and Pajot recommends quotes of or recommends or quotes Guénon a lot. And I would say that this is a very interesting case because then you have Jordan Peterson, who is more like a Burkean conservative in the most of it. Then he has that they are related. They are related. But then, I mean, I think that if you want to say something, Christian, I think that you always make very interesting comments, and I think it would be very interesting to if you elaborate more what you were commenting in the comments, if you want, of course. No, Christian is not with us. Okay. So, well, I mean, I would say in on that regard, while Christian is getting ready, um, I would say that thank you, Alex, for the lecture. I think it's very important that we recognize all these three points of view and basically to say who are our allies and who are our enemies in the movement, because sometimes we just get in the pity stuff and then, oh no, I don't talk to you because you are an Alexandrite. No, I don't talk to you because you are a Christopher Alexander, or you are postmodernist, etc. And then we forget that many times postmodernism, many people put it as the linking point of the rebirth of the movement, and it wasn't. I mean, postmodernism was a triggering, but postmodernism, as I have always said, and we will talk about that next week in the session, it was just enfant terribles wanted to piece of everyone. Miguel has a question. All yours, Miguel.
Thank you, Pablo, and thank you, Alexander, for this good talk. It's good revisiting this topic every now and then on philosophy. So my question is, and this is, I want to share something that I've noticed, and I want to hear your take on it. And it's that I see that a lot of members in the traditional architecture revival or uprising, or however you want to call it, have a notion of God or religious affiliation. And I find that very interesting. I feel that very few people that I have met so far are atheist or are secular or don't have a notion of the spiritual or of something other than just the material realm. So I wanted to ask you about that and what your thoughts were. Why do you think that is that most people that have those religious or spiritual inclinations find themselves in these circles that we're gathering in?
Well, I think traditional architecture is part of the pre-Enlightenment world, pre-materialistic world, right? So it's connected with that when that metaphysical view, which is so basically, I can say something about the Catholics. That I know the Catholics a lot. I'm a Catholic myself, so I know more about Catholicism than about Protestant the Protestantism. But when it comes to Catholicism, at least in its most like famous and influential and ancient and influential pre-Vatican II theological outlook is deeply Thomistic. And Thomism is a version of Neoplatonism. And many people will recognize that as an interpretation of Catholic interpretation of Neoplatonism. In the same way that Al-Arabi interpreted Neoplatonism for and many other thinkers in the Middle East for Islam and so on. So these views are connected with traditional metaphysics. So Catholics tend to embrace the first metaphysics. I include Catholics in the metaphysician camp, definitely. And the reason is because in traditional metaphysics, I'm writing an article about that, like explaining a little bit more about what tradition thinks about beauty. There's a lot of confusion about that. Beauty is not something that we like, or we like beauty, because this is obviously beautiful and that's obviously ugly. Beauty is arguably, it's not one of the transcendentals according to Aquinas, but it's very close to the transcendental in the sense that it's convertible with being. So everything that is beautiful is also, for that reason, good and true. So this is how I think, and the truth and the good is something that connects you to what is ultimately true, good and good, which is God, right? So this is basically the reason why beauty is so important to them. And classical architecture is capable of generating that beauty because of that symbolic power that I try to talk about, where architecture represents all these levels of reality. To my mind, via classical architecture. Yeah. This is basically
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Miguel, and thank you, Alex. I think that now we have Christian, then we have Amar, and then we have James Tong. So, Christian, would you like to say something, or would you prefer to speak after Amar and James Tong? It's up to you completely.
No, it's just a quick comment. Basically, what I was saying is that at least here in the US, I've been here for basically the last year, and there has been this quite big resurgence in the interest about metaphysical questions, and mostly due to that first wave of Jordan Peterson popularizing the Bible again and biblical discussions, but that triggered in a lot of ways, especially in the wake of COVID, the interest of people uh, rediscovering the roots of their traditions. One of the big consequences of that, especially because of the people that he uh, collaborated with during that time, is that Orthodox Christianity is seen as a more mystical, more reserved way of being in the world that has been having a lot of has been having experiments experimenting and growth here in the US. I'm proud of that. I'm going to Orthodox Church since January here. I was in Texas for the start of the year, and most of the people there were converts, and they had a big catechumenate of young men specifically because, and a lot of them had the same talking with them had a similar experience to me that around 2020, 2019, 2018, we were looking for ourselves, and we get into hearing Jordan Peterson, and then through him, people like Payot that try to rehabilitate a metaphysical view of the world from a traditional Christian perspective, and there's other people that has collaborated, like another neuroscientist from the University of Toronto that are trying to bring back this way of experiencing the world, of thinking not in the material sense of the word, but thinking in what is beyond our existence. And this guy is the neuroscientist, for example. His name is John Burkean. He has a whole movement behind him talking about this idea of the meaning crisis, and he is trying to bring people to experience the world in a different way of recognizing that they are not alone, that they are influenced by other things that go beyond ourselves. He specifically is a quite strange guy. He said he has said publicly in interviews that he has his own diamond in the same way of Socrates, and he speaks with him. He called that his spirit Hermes. But I'm talking, this guy is a neuroscientist, well respected and quite unreal, and has done a lot of research, uh, and has a great standing in the scholarly community of, of neuroscience. So these are not fringe weird people that are rehabilitating this. It's just that it's an undercurrent that I think their effects are really interesting to follow. And Payot, for example, he recommends a lot of people to read and introduce themselves to Wenon. And there's other people like Paul Skinner, that he's Irish, I think. He's connected to Payot also, and he recently published a book about technology and the effects of the industrial society, and he speaks from this metaphysical point of view. In his case, for example, he was an extreme environmentalist, and he was even into witchcraft. And now he's an Orthodox Christian, writing about the effects of technology and how it's detached of tradition in any meaningful way. Uh, so basically, what I'm trying to say is that right now there's a big undercurrent that it's worth paying attention, even if you are not a believer, of people trying to bring the metaphysics back into the public sphere, because it's the only way through all of this, I think. Yeah, and it has been my own experience now that I went from a Pentecostal background to a more grounded Christian way of being. So that's maybe what I wanted to comment on.
Thank you.
That's quite interesting, Christian, in the sense that yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people are moving from one side to another. And I mean, I think that with Christianity, I think we are living that situation in which there are all these a lot of non-denominational. I mean, obviously Pentecostal almost enters into that, and then yeah, there is like a sort of call of attention, and people are coming to more traditional. I mean, namely mostly Catholic and Orthodox on each side, or even the more even conservative ways of Lutheranism. So, in more Church of England, I wouldn't say it's the
From a practical perspective, I think to convince your clients of what you do, to convince the wider public, it's more useful for you to use an empiricist line of argumentation, I believe, because this materialist empiricism is the air we breathe in our society, right? So it's going to be very hard for you to convince clients or the general public of the importance of traditional architecture if you have to make like a religious or metaphysical case. So yeah, I think ultimately it's not incompatible, neuroscience with traditional metaphysics. And obviously there is no truth, it's just truth. If you believe it, both of them are true. They must be compatible. They all help each other, have to be interpreted in a coherent way, but I don't see any incoherence in embracing these two positions. But if you are in the religious, you will have to weaken the materialistic claims of the empiricists. You can adopt like some methodological materialism, but you have to refrain from being a full materialist. Yeah, this is what I would say.
Can
And
I add
just
a
a final
quick
comment.
comment?
Sorry, just a
No,
final
go.
comment
Yeah.
is that I am now at Notre Dame University studying, and I was a modernist architect for my education, and I worked in architecture for 4 years and a half. This movement, basically, and I think that explains why a lot of people that are involved with traditional architecture uh, have religious outlooks, because my spiritual movement, led me to my career change also, because it's connected, both things. In if you actually believe that tradition has value, that has to affect everything else in your outlook in life. So I think that's why you find a lot of people that are in the same place. Even in my experience with other students here in Notre Dame, there's a few others that are doing that, not necessarily to Eastern Orthodoxy, but to more traditional forms of Christianity, because they have been experiencing that movement also, and that necessity of grounding themselves in deeper metaphysical truths as they are learning about traditional architecture.
Christian, if I may add a comment to what you're saying, which I think is very true, and it's something like a lot of people are experiencing, especially young people, myself included. I'm also a practicing Catholic. Is a reference to a video I think that Jonathan Peugeot actually released on YouTube, explaining how he believes that, and a lot of people believe that we have exhausted a sort of spiritual capital that we have carried since since the dawn of modernism. When modernism was established and when all of these new ideas started coming out, there was still a lot of spiritual capital. There was still a lot of morals and ways of thinking that people carried despite living in a modern society, but they still had like some other values that held throughout. And over time, they withered and they grew less strong. And we have reached a point, according to him, where uh, people kind of see the material world and they say, okay, well, what's my life's purpose? My life's purpose is just I go to school, I go to university, I get married, I get a job, and then I just, I buy a house, I buy things, and then I die and leave it to my descendants. And they say, well, is that it? Is that all there is to life? And I think we've exhausted that spiritual capital and we're trying to find something. We're like scratching at something again, trying to find that meaning and purpose. That's all I want to say. I don't want to take time from the other people who have questions.
Thank you, Miguel. I mean, I think you have made a very interesting point in the sense that, which is true. I mean, we're in a cultural moment in which we have exhausted, as you said very, very rightly, the spiritual capital, and it's something that we need to bear in mind why there is this return. And you see, especially within amongst young people, that they have been growing in a society, especially the Gen Z, the so-called Gen Z. They have grown in a society that has been completely secularized, that has completely stripped out of value, that has been living completely into a spiritual paradigm that was inserted, a modernist spiritual paradigm, which was materialistic, capitalist, and yeah, fully materialistic. Let's not enter into the economic system because it was on both sides of the economical system. And that system started and got exhausted very quickly. I mean, it started in the 20s and 30s, start taking the momentum from the 50s, 60s. After 1968, it takes full steam, but it takes still another from 1968. It still adds 30 years or so to be removed. And when it finally achieves the result of completely creating a new society free of all the previous formation, which was supposed to happen with everyone born from 1990, the end of history, etc. It didn't happen. So I think that you guys are pointing out to something very interesting, and there is a lot of things happening around. I mean, all the explosion of Christian denominations in South America is also related to all that, to that implementation, or the fact that the Plan Marshall came with the modernist agenda, etc. But again, I mean, I don't want to monopolize. I think that Amar has a question. So Amar, please. Sorry to have to keep you waiting.
No, it's fine. I really, really enjoy these conversations. Thank you, Mr. Alexander. I enjoyed your lecture completely and fully. Me coming from the East, there isn't much of an issue with religion and holding on to that. Something I think the Gen Z has an issue with is education. As much as I like to, read about, for example, Socrates and, for example, Platon, it's very difficult to get my generation to pick up a book and read it. Is our approach for the future incorrect, or do you feel like your approach could work with my generation? Because I feel like even nowadays on social media, I can't make a video for longer than a minute because then they're out of the scroll. So what kind of approach would you recommend to someone like us from our generation to
So
encourage others to basically traditional and read more and educate themselves? Because that's quite an issue I have right now.
What I find is ever since the internet became popular, there's a lot more information available to everyone. So what I feel that has been happening is that the smart people are getting smarter and the dumb are getting dumber. But you do have like lots of people from the younger generation. Now, myself, I was benefited from the internet as well. All these ideas, we could only get in touch with them because of the internet. Before that, you would have like a much more like a restricted like a scope of books or that you could find. You depend a lot on the guidance of your professors, and now not so much. You can just. I've got people have never read very much. I don't think that that's true. I think people are just. I think it's an illusion that Gen Z is fantastic. It's just great. There's more alternatives. You have more. You have more information in your hands. You can go to archive.org. You can find out everything you want to find out about whatever tradition you're interested in. If you're interested in Plato, you seem to be interested in Plato and Aristotle. You will find that this in the East, Plato, especially in the Muslim world, Plato is kind of a founding figure in theology, and it's not very different from the West in that respect. Like in theology, there's lots of similarities. You will find that surprising if you read Thomas Aquinas, if you read he was reading many of the Muslim thinkers. If you think of Avicenna, for example, very influential, right? Nowadays a Persian philosopher, right? From the 9th century, I believe. It's very influential still in the Muslim world. And I mean, these people, it would be very hard for a Western to have access to these things like when I was young. And now, it's just like that. You just find a YouTuber explaining these things to you, introducing these things to you. And I think it's, but people don't read. They have never read. They have no patience. Most people are just very worldly. That's how they are. They talk about what happened to them in the afternoon and what party they're going to over the weekend. And I think the world has always been like that. Most people are worldly. It's not a bad thing, but that's not most people are. People are interested in philosophy are a tiny minority. And these people have always existed and now have more options. They have more books, they have more people to talk to reach out, to connect. I'm very optimistic actually to the future. I'm not negative at all. But you have to be disciplined. You have to avoid distractions. This is a habit that you have to acquire. It's a moral habit to be able to use your time well, not waste your time. And this is all I can say to you. You're in a very good position, Gen Z. In a very, very good position. Better than my generation.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
which is true. I mean, it's what Alex is saying. I mean, people never read so much. People never. It is a bit of a fallacy. I mean, I remember. I mean, I put always the example. My grandmother, whom I love a lot, she didn't have TV. She read a lot. But was my grandmother reading Thomas Aquinas or reading? No, she was reading Western novels, like Western, like proper American Western novel and romantic novels. It was the typical thing. And she was like all night reading. And then when she got the radio, she stopped reading novels. She started listening to the radio novels. And then when she got the TV, she started watching the telenovelas, which everyone in South America we know very well. Um, is that a problem? No, it's entertainment. And people used to read before for entertainment. And I think we have to make that distinction between the reading for enlightenment and the reading for entertainment. And I think that the level of entertainment, it has always been the same. No, when you don't work, you try to entertain yourself on things. And now it's the internet and scrolling on the Instagram. And before it was something else. So I would say that, yeah, and you have more resources now than ever. And the attention span, I would say, is the same. If you check people from the late antiquity, they would be complaining about the same topic. If it is very easy to go for the people who were on the 5th century, Boetius and the others, just to say, oh yeah, the world is ending, blah blah blah. But the war has always been ending. The whole always been being a problem. So and we have all the generational. There has always been a generational war. I think that the problem is that now it has become more.
But this is common, isn't it, Pablo? Like, just say like the young generation degenerates, like, oh, where's the world going, and blah blah blah. As his sister were talking about, like, all the young generation. There's nothing wrong with Generation Z. So from my experience, huh?
O tempora o moris. No,
I think it's fantastic that just normal people, just like everyone else. Some of them are not so normal, but most people are just people.
So
I'm optimistic.
We have another
one quick comment on that,
Yeah.
and a recommendation. There's a book of Nicholas Carr. It's called "What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains." It's like 2010 book, but I mean, it's like a prophetic book about technology in many ways because everything that he said has come to pass. And he was an inspiration for people like Paul Kinsner that I was mentioning. And one of the things that he says in the book is that people think that we're becoming more stupid in many ways, but it's not that we're becoming more stupid. What is happening is that this is exceptional time produced by the Enlightenment and the printing press is regressing to the mean. People all throughout history, literate people were just 3 to 5% of a population, never more than that. You have this exceptional moment through the introduction of the printing press that now everybody has access to being literate. But now that we advance to the internet, people are just coming back to what they have always done. And it's basically an oral, live through an oral tradition. People were not, we are not designed to all of us be scholars and spending our time reading, as was the Enlightenment project. It's not a normal thing for people to live that way. And actually, proper reading, people do more today than people that actually read books did 50, 60, 70 years ago. The only thing that we're just reading short excerpts through the internet all day, but you're reading more than people in the past. It's just that it's a change, it's a regression to the mean. What is happening?
That's quite interesting actually. That's quite interesting in the sense of, yeah, I mean, we have, we have that say in Spanish, cada día que amanece, el número de tontos crece, no? But we have been saying that since ever. So I think that this is very significant that we are not in such bad times, and as we are keen to say, and at the end of the day, it's like the small thing that makes all those good times. But yeah, I mean, I think that on the contrary, I think we're in the best time because we are capable of organizing. I mean, when I was a student, and when Alex was a student, and when Dr. Buras was a student, Christopher Alexander was a student, and so on and so on, I remember that the only window I had to all this movement on traditional architecture was the few books that were in the library of the School of Sevilla. What was not in the library, I ignored it because I didn't know what it was. What was not in the bibliographical references, I ignored it. I didn't know that it existed. And now we have a much wider access to everything. But that doesn't mean, but I mean, the percentage of people who are still curious are still the same. I mean, I remember having read, I mean, if you have read The Name of the Rose, you have all this magnificent library in the book, but the reality is that most of the monasteries on the Middle Ages, they had probably, they would be lucky if they had 100 books in the in their in their shelves. And that would be a great library. I mean, but then I mean, you have all the big ones and Galling and the others. But I think that that's something that we need to consider as well for the
And great philosopher, American philosophers of the last years, like Mortimer Adler, that is one of the most popular books about how to read well. Is it's basically the name of the book is how to read. Uh, and how to read books. I don't remember now exactly. But the point is that one of the things that he says that the important thing is not reading for reading. The important thing is reading great books and good old books. Because reading for reading is it doesn't get you anywhere.
no.
And that goes to the point of the monasteries and people of the past. People like Jerome that translated the Vulgate, that translated the Hebrew Bible to what is known as the Vulgate. He was maybe lucky if he had 20 books around him because the access was minimum. And we're talking about one of the most celebrated ancient scholars. But we think like we gorge ourselves with 20 or 30 fiction novels a year. That's gonna make us more enlightened, and that it doesn't work that way. You have to read good books, and read it is like entertainment. You can spend your life just seeing Marvel movies, or you can see great classics of films. It's up to you.
Yeah, but it's exactly the same. I mean, now we read Don Quixote, one of the biggest, greatest books in Spanish literature. You could read Great Expectations or Pride and Prejudice in English, but then are they actually? I mean, they're pillars of the literature, but are they pillars of the philosophy? Are they people of the thinking? Are the people of the thought in England, and the thought in Spain? They are an expression of the culture. But Don Quixote was written against the the popular novel, the knighthood novels. Northern Abbey by Jane Austen was written against the Gothic novels. So it was just things that were happening. And I think you have made the point. I am always a bit like a skeptic when the word good old books are mentioned because I mean it sometimes it focuses more on the old than on the good. But at the same time, it makes you think what is because there are good new books. Um,
Contextualizing that, he refers
I
the
know,
idea of good books is those that are, as you're saying, pillars of culture,
I
because
know.
that actually makes you more capable of understanding the movements and shifts in history. And being quite honest, when you go to the list that different scholars have done, it's basically 200, 300 books that have directed most of culture around time.
And that's very significant because that's also telling you the scope of the books. No, it's like it's 200 books you have mentioned. I mean, probably we could read. I mean, I hate making lists, but I do enough lists at work.
I
But
did write a few books here. I can illustrating a little bit each of these views. So in a traditional movement, I don't know, some of you will know Steve Bass.
oh yes,
You know him, right? He wrote a book called Beauty, Memory, and Unity for people who are interested in. Yes, in the beginning,
Yeah,
I believe he didn't say anything. I believe he's a Guénonian traditionalist from the. He talks a lot about Neoplatonism, and this is something that these people like. So this would be like one example from an architect that defends the metaphysical view, and he doesn't seem to be a Christian at all. He seems to be like more like a Neoplatonist, Guénonian traditionalist, something like that. So if you're interested in that,
I would say
um,
is more the theosophist and illuminated. He's a lovely person. We had him in the academy for several years until now. He's a
yeah,
little,
theosophy would be a kin to that view as
yeah,
well. Like it is a metaphysician anyway.
yeah, yeah. It was a very spiritual lecture, the one he gave about proportion. We had
Yeah,
at the
it's an
academy.
interesting book, that one. If you're interested in proportion, I'm slightly skeptical about these Pythagorean approaches to proportion, but yeah, it's worth having it, definitely.
Say that as a good American, he is a lot into the dynamic symmetries and all that stuff.
Yeah.
We
So
copy the parts a little bit from from the canon, let's say.
if you want to see, like, there is a book. So this would be like there's another book which came like some years ago, like some 5 years ago, maybe not more than that, by a French philosopher that I read a lot. Unfortunately, his work hasn't been translated to English yet. But it's if you can read French, it's definitely worth the book. It's called L'art et le désir de Dieu, which is the art and the desire of God, which is an explanation of kind of a Thomistic aesthetics. Very interesting in how it fits into this whole like a metaphysical view. This is a very interesting book. Should be translated to English. It's a shame that it hasn't been translated to English, but it's the Catholic perspective on art. So Roger Privé, in spite of the fact that he's French, he's very much in the Anglo-American analytic tradition. So his dialogue is with mostly American and English authors. So it would be very interesting to especially people who are acquainted with that world to read his books. It's very interesting. Yeah, apart from I think the other books I mentioned, like already, Christopher Alexander, and Sussman and Justin Holland, Roger Scruton's books, The Aesthetics of Architecture. It's just a difficult book. Aesthetics of Architecture will require some grounding in philosophy. It's a difficult book, but Beauty, a very short introduction, is not difficult at all, and it's definitely a book that I would recommend. Then Jane Jacobs is interesting as well.
Yeah, Jane Jacobs is very good.
Super good. Death and Life of Great American Cities. It's a must read. There is a philosopher that died a few years ago called Dennis Dutton. Dennis Dutton wrote a book called The Art Instinct, which is very interesting. It's in aesthetics, like based on this kind of evolutionary psychology and cognitive. It's not about architecture specifically. It's more like broad. It's about art. It's a very interesting book. I would recommend if you feel inclined to this materialistic worldview. I think Dutton is a friend of Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett, and that's his peer group. So this is probably something that would be very popular in America. Very popular in America. Not a Christian school. Yeah, these are some books that I had written about. Nico Salingaros as well.
Yeah, Nico
The
Salingaros
Theory
is
of Architecture. His book is
anti-architecture construction is very good as well.
Yeah.
In that regard, it's not that it has age, it's that obviously it has become a bit obsolete because nobody does the construction anymore, but it was very relevant back in time when it was done.
Yeah. Salingaros, I think he worked with Christopher Alexander, right?
Yes.
In the beginning of his career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Salingaros is very, very what's the name of this? Alexandrite, as Dr. Buras would say.
Yeah, so this is an empiricist, scientifically minded, not a Christian at all, as far as I know. And so it's the third approach, the empiricist approach, which I find very popular.
Yeah,
it's the easiest one for you to use to convince people who are not into traditional architecture. It's the easiest one for you to talk your clients into what you're doing. So especially if you're living in England or in America, which is where I'm based. So maybe if you're somewhere else, that's not.
No, but especially through all the eye tracking, it has become the empiricism, the neuroscientific approach has become like the first one.
Nirburas,
Sussman, Nirburas, so all of them. I mean, Nirburas is writing another book, The Neuroaesthetic City, where he's delving and deeping more into that. So it's it's the idea.
Yeah, the Burkean conservative approach, I think it's on the wane, right?
It's a bit on the waning. I think it's because the because it's very nostalgic, and they haven't managed to set up a proper framework. The only framework is nostalgia, and that nostalgia, it's fading as well, because also
Yeah.
the people who defend it from I don't want to enter into moral categories, but a lot of conservatives are not conservative at all. The moment that conservatism as an ideology has disappeared, they cannot claim a nostalgia, because they are not nostalgics. It's what there was
Yeah.
a moment ago of valuing the old because of the economic value of the old, not because of the symbolic value or the scientific value of the old. I think that's the problem. Why they are not, they are receding, I would say. I mean, you still have a lot of them. There is a lot of people clinging onto that, trying to own and to appropriate the definition of beauty, and to say now we are defining beauty by law, while I mean the only way of defining beauty is through a dictionary, not through a law, although a law might help on that. So there is another question from James Tong. Sorry, James, we have been keeping you till the end.
No worries. Thank you, guys. This has been fascinating. Thank you, Alexander. This really interesting conversation and really interesting discussion as well. Leading on from the talk of metaphysics, is it important for the architect to have a proper metaphysical underpinning rather than just build according to a style? If you just build according to a style without the metaphysical underpinning, it's likely to fall flat and you're missing the key elements of it. For example, you could build a beautiful building and stick it in the middle of a roundabout, and it doesn't serve its purpose. And linked to that, can the architectural system be built from the ground up, or does it have to be done top down? I'm thinking that if the metaphysic comes from the bottom up, it's going to be more resilient and more future proof than if it's designed top down.
So the metaphysical approach is an all-round approach. It will tell you about metaphysics is kind of the most fundamental things about the world. So we will give you like a whole environment, talk about society, about there's this correct way for society to behave, and there is a degenerate way for society to behave. There is and this is the basic idea of the metaphysical approach. So the cosmos is headed towards a certain goal, towards a certain end, and some people are going that direction, some people are not, and it's the metaphysical outlook that will show you where you are, so whether you're descending into matter, into dispersion, into quantity, or if you're going towards unity, towards God, and that sort of thing. So this is basically what everyone used to believe. Everyone was thinking about these matters up until the 17th century, I suppose. So it's the old approach, the traditional approach in the West, everywhere. But if we're here based in the West and talking about the West, yes, definitely. That's the traditional approach in the West. So I believe it is very important. I myself, I didn't say that, but that's my view. I believe that ultimately it's good, but not only for traditional architecture, just for any human being. I mean, you have to be grounded in these deep truths. The other approaches, they all embrace a certain degree of skepticism, basically, which is the modern era. Skeptical about metaphysics, about the possibility of knowing the ultimate grounds of things. And this is what the foundation of the modern world is, this radical skepticism, more and more radical, right? So I'm not very skeptical. I truly believe in the capacity of the human rationality to know these metaphysical principles with certainty. But Richard Weaver was an American conservative writing in the 1930s. He talks about the metaphysical dream. Everyone has a metaphysical dream. So, and here I'm not talking about metaphysics in a broader sense. So we have this metaphysical Platonist / Aristotelian metaphysics that grounds Christianity and Islam, for example. But it also have like a metaphysical view. If you're a skeptic and you believe, for example, as most people with the scientifically minded people believe that there are brute facts that cannot be explained in principle. For example, the laws. Why do we have like the laws of nature? Why is there something rather than nothing? They will say, oh, these are just brute facts, which is Burton Russell's term for it. It just can't explain it. It's just beyond human rationality. So in that sense, the moderns are much more skeptical than the ancients. And in this process, this is also a metaphysical view. In the sense that it's kind of the most fundamental things that people believe about reality. So everyone in that sense will have a metaphysical view. It's not the metaphysical view, the Platonist metaphysical view, but it's a metaphysical view. I think that ultimately, since I myself embrace this metaphysical view, I believe that traditional architecture or anything that is good in society depends on people being conscious of that. Because if you're not, or at least you don't have like a few people in society that are guiding the others that believe in that, things degenerate quickly towards away from that principle of the first metaphysical principle. This is what I personally believe, but I'm a minority. You don't have to be a Catholic to believe in that. You can be like, as we're talking about Steve Bass, you can be like a Platonist, for example, or a metaphysician. You don't have to be, or even a Christian. You can be a Muslim and believe in that as well. I mean, you can be a Hindu and believe in that as well. You can be a Chinese person interested in the Tao and believe in that as well. So this is not like a Western thing. It's broader, much broader than that. But this is not common at all in the West. Not in England, certainly not in England, not where I come from, which is Brazil originally, not in the US, which are the places that I'm most, that I know best. The most common approach is the brute fact approach, the materialistic approach, not even the Burkean approach. The empiricist approach will take you very far in selling traditional architecture. This is what I'm saying. I don't think it's false in the sense that many of the discoveries are just very important and very interesting about neuroscience, about how we behave, about what we like. I think many of the discoveries are very useful, but they are very skeptical. They don't want to ground it anywhere. They're just like empiricists, almost positivistic findings about things. Oh, we like this and we behave like that because this and that research and statistics and so on. So I think that's insufficient to my mind to answer your question very, very bluntly. I think that's insufficient. But
they'll reach a dead end eventually.
Sorry?
That empiricist approach eventually will reach a dead end.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
exactly. It can only go so far.
Dissolve into modernism, into everything. It's not robust enough, I think. But it's very useful, and we have to know, because this is what will get your people building. You will not be able to convince people about, oh, let's talk about Platonism. No, that's not going to happen. So forget it. You're going to talk about, oh, look, this is what the latest findings of neuroscience. Oh, people are on board with it. Oh, these are the latest findings of evolutionary psychology. Yes, of course. Oh, Plato said it. Oh no, sorry, mate. This is something that I'm not gonna tag along. Yeah, that's it.
I think on top of what Alex has said, I would also say that at the end of the day, this is there is I would say that we're moving more from the down to the up, because at the end of the day we are architects. We do work for our clients, and the client is always right. So if our clients come and demand classical, it is our moral duty to give them classical. We need to educate them in giving them the right classical, the same way that modernists educated their clients back in the past to give them their right version of architecture, and as architects have always done. I mean, I remember when I was at university, one of the first things that my professors told us is that you need to give what the client tells you. But if the client tells you that they want the WC, the toilet, in the courtyard outside the house, which is a very traditional solution, you tell them no, because it's better to have them inside, because you don't want to go to the loo and get wet when it is raining. So it's better if it is inside. So I think that there is a race to the from the bottom to the up, and then there should be eventually uh, uh, moving down. The thing is that at the same time, that those elites that are controlling the discourse, they're getting old. So we have been talking about generation, and we are talking about a toilet in the courtyard, Amar. Sorry, a toilet in the courtyard. Sorry if I have been confusing. But some people, I mean, obviously it's not anymore. They don't ask for that anymore. But it was something still up in the 80s, 90s. People would ask it because it was what was done in the in many traditional houses. Because you don't have a toilet, where do you build the toilet? Where you have a space? Where do you have the space in the courtyard? So, but at the same time, we have been having a very from top to bottom imposition of modernism. We have had the heaven has been taken by a storm. Architects, modernists took heaven by a storm, and they did it in a very wise way. I mean, they just took over the institutions, took over the culture, and it's something that we're still learning, and we're still living the consequences. So I think that it has to be on both sides, and sometimes you need to learn from them to know how to get rid of them. You need to know your enemy, and that's also something important. You cannot fear your enemy. You cannot fear modernism. You cannot lament them. You need to know them, and you need to know how to deal with them. And that's important. So that's why you need to deal with them from the top, from the bottom to the top, and then find the opportunity to enter into the top, and then use them on the for that, because the demand is there. And at the end of the day, it's very few people heavily ideologized who are managing this. And remember when we were talking about Le Corbusier and the debate in the RBA in 1928, people only listen to him because he talks more and louder than the rest. So I think that that's important, and that control of the discourse is still there, and it is in the hands of everyone to break it. We're in the process. That's why we should be optimistic, because the fact that we have people today talking, and we're going to upload this video, more people are going to watch it, and then they discuss them, etc. It's a symbol that people are tired of this. The same way that they were tired in the 70s about postmodernity, but then what they were given was more of the same. No? They just went for a party and they forgot about everything. And now it's like, okay, fine, we were tired of this. We went to the party. We got a long hangover of 40 or 50 years. What do we do now? And usually after a bad hangover, what do you say? I'm not going to drink anymore. Now we are in the stages of that.
I have one more question if there's time. It might be beyond the scope of this discussion. I was just wondering, I think I read somewhere Pugin saying that classicism was, I'm paraphrasing, but was barbarous, and that Gothic was the godly architecture.
Yes.
Why is Gothic seen as what's the argument between classical and Gothic?
Interesting what you're saying. That's not uncommon. You can hear that today. Not only
you hear that a lot. And actually, Pugin is the basis of modernism.
I'll give my take on it. I think it's merely associationism. They feel that the Middle Ages was the Catholic age, and Europe was completely Catholic from Scandinavia to Italy. And this is the architecture that was being done or associated with that era of the purity of the architecture of Christendom. I think that's how they would put it. This is what I would say. It's association. And they believe that this world started to be destroyed by the Renaissance, and the Renaissance is recovering pagan, pre-Christian architecture, and it's the beginning of the end. I do not agree with that view. I think that view is superficial. I believe that, first of all, Christianity began with pagan architecture. The first churches were Roman basilicas using the classical orders. I've been to Santa Sabina in Rome recently, and it's just basically a basilica with the classical orders, and it's got a beautiful door carved in timber from the 4th century. It's the oldest, apparently. Well, I've been told that. I don't know. The oldest timber door, surviving timber door, carved timber door in the world. But I believe it's merely association. I believe classical architecture is deeply grounded in this metaphysical tradition, because antiquity was grounded in this metaphysical tradition. Pythagoreanism is everywhere. It's the beginning of aesthetic theory. So I think it's nonsense. It's basically associationism. I think it's a modern take, actually. The modernists, they tend to associate architecture. Oh, this architecture is bad because you associate that. It doesn't. Well, look, we might be interesting. We might talk about aesthetics, and I am a representationalist. I believe that art represents something always. It's one of the views that people have on aesthetics, and so I believe symbolism can be like metaphysical or deep. So it represents like several levels of reality, as I mentioned to you, like on top of each other. But modern people, since they don't believe that there are other levels of reality, matter is all there is. So symbols represent something else horizontally, some other reality away from here. So it's basically by association that they proceed. So you see an architecture, for example, that was built by the fascists. That architecture represents what? Fascism. So it's an architecture that was built by the Christians. What is it that architecture represents? Christianity, and so on. So I think it doesn't go beyond that. I think it's a very superficial and modernist take. And Pugin was a victim of that, to my mind.
Pugin was probably the first.
The first, yeah, he was a modern man, more modern than you would like.
Yes, that's why he's been that advocate of neo-Gothic. I think that in the wider context.
Very good architect, though. I'm not saying Pugin is amazing. You can learn a lot from him. Great architect.
True, I mean, especially obviously for neo-Gothic. I think that in the wider context, Pugin is writing in a moment in which we have been living in the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and the culmination of the Enlightenment, the dream of reason, el sueño de la razón, as we say in Spanish, was technically or ideologically was the French Revolution. But the dream of reason produces monsters. And the dream of reason produced the monster of the French Revolution and the monster of the Napoleonic Wars. What happens then? That you have France, which has become fully neoclassical, with its aspirations of the Enlightenment, expands in a militaristic and very destroying way those points of view through the whole Europe, with a special point in fighting England. So, and that generates, before the internationalization of classicism, which was the objective of the Enlightenment in 18th century, everyone was a classicist. There was only a couple of snobs in UK who were playing around with neo-Gothic. Everyone was a classicist. And then this idea was because everyone was thinking that the values of Enlightenment were going to take you to a much better world. What happens after the French Revolution, after the settlement of the Napoleonic Wars? People start to realize that they have been living 30 years in which they have, again, because the French Revolution was a bit like the modernists. They destroyed everything, and they destroyed everything in such a way that then everything remained the same. So by the 1830s, people were angry. People were seeing that not only we have had all the problems with the French Revolution, we are starting to have the problems of the Industrial Revolution, that is an untamed monster coming hand by hand with neoclassicism, because it was what was then. It was all the debate around the Greek revival. And then what Pugin comes and says is that all these aspirations that classicism was saying that they were going to give us, this ideal of harmonic life, is not working, has never worked, because if they say that if the ideal was the French Revolution, then the French Revolution hasn't worked, isn't working, isn't doing well. The monarchy, the British monarchy in the 1830s was in a very bad moment. It was a very bad moment as well at the beginning of Queen Victoria's reign, end of the William IV, definitely in very bad moment in George IV. So in that context, Pugin and many others start looking to the Middle Ages, and then they find that as opposed to the modern system of liberté, fraternité, égalité, of elections, etc., all the system that was happening in France and was expanding through the whole world, all this shattering of the ancien regime wasn't producing the desired effect. It was just being used by the elites to keep themselves on the power, which is the beginning of liberalism. So what happens is that then people were starting to have faith on that, and then it's together with the resistance to Napoleon, which makes everyone look at their own country. So if we are all neoclassical and we don't want to be part of the French neoclassicism that is being imposed by Napoleon, we need to look at our own stuff. And then everyone would start looking at something at their own past. No, France would be expanding not the Greek and Roman classicism. France would be expanding the French neoclassicism with the model that was created on the École Polytechnique, as opposed to the École des Beaux-Arts. And it is in that context of reaction against the Napoleonic Wars, against against the destruction of the ancien regime by the liberalism, because sometimes we forget that the beginning of the Industrial Revolution were very shattering, because people from night to day, they were losing ancient privileges, ancient rights. They were being lost, they were being shattered, because all of a sudden a bunch of politicians in the capital decide that that's not anymore valid. And people whose way of life was based on using the communal land disappears. Then they have to go to work in the factories. They're living worse, but they keep being told that that's for the best. And it is in that context where seeing that the propaganda isn't working is when Putin looks at the Middle Ages. It's in that context. I mean, Putin would look at it from a very, very moral perspective, but it would happen in other places, because at the same time is when Victor Hugo is publishing Our Lady of Notre Dame, the famous with Quasimodo, etc., is publishing that novel, which was the novel that saved the Cathedral of Notre Dame from destruction. So there is a reaction against the so-called advantages of the world post French Revolution, and that comes hand by hand with a Gothic revival and a very strong interest in the Middle Ages. So it's not only Gothic; it's the interest in the Middle Ages, which are seen as a period of balance, a period of harmony, and that's what you need to understand why they start looking at the Middle Ages, because these people from night to day, because normally we have the feeling and the thing that the ancien regime was bad. The ancien regime had a lot of inequalities, but at the same time, the ancien regime had systems and ways to protect the commoners, to give something to the commoners. One of the things we normally forget is that the amount of holidays that they had prior to the Industrial Revolution. I think it was like minimum a third of the year were holidays, excluding Sundays. So a third of what will be now working days were holidays, because the rhythm was agricultural. So you needed to stop. In winter, you needed to have stops when before, after the harvest, etc. And all that disappears. It's just boom. All of a sudden, I mean, in UK, it goes, I think it was from 40 to 60 days of holidays to have only 4 days of bank holidays, what would be known. And this happened all over Europe. So it is in that sense of and protection where people would start having the nostalgia. It will be, okay, fine, yeah, we have cut the king's head. We are all equal. Equal to what? Equal to be equally exploded. And that's what people started to look at the Middle Ages. And when you read Contrast by Putin is a very hard book. But Putin opposes the inequalities and the problems, the issues of the early industrial England. He puts them as he opposes them to a very highly idealized medieval England, which is I would say, because England was, particularly England, had a very, I would have to say, 13th century England, but the England that they are claiming is more the 15th and early 16th century England, was highly unstable. So I think that's why Putin becomes so harsh with classicism, and that's why a lot of people embraced it. And also, on top of that, then it became even more popular when in the Industrial Revolution, in the International Exhibition of 1851, they bring England or United Kingdom, Britain, organized exhibition to show off how good the Industrial Revolution is, how leading the world England is, United Kingdom is, and then they find that the quality of their industrialized products are worse than all the handcrafted products. And then they also realize that in the 50 years of heavy industrialization, they have destroyed a good portion of the craftsmanship. And that is when they start climbing the Middle Ages, when more risk comes, and Alex was mentioning that at the beginning. And that is a bit the beginning of all that neo-Gothic reaction against classicism. It starts with the Germans, it starts with the English at the same time. It is also a very Northern European thing against the South. So you can also see it in that way. I don't know if we have answered your question with all this.
Fascinating. Yeah, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. So sometimes, I mean, it's like I start
Got more
talking
than I bargained for there.
and I don't know if I have answered the question or not, or have it just going through the tangent.
No,
Right.
that's fantastic.
I'm afraid I'll have to leave you. I have something else to attend.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Alex,
But
for being here.
thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure,
Yeah.
and I hope I'll see you again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think you will come probably January or so to show us about your next stage of the research.
Oh, yes, yes. So we're going to talk a lot about beauty and the good and get more into the metaphysical, which I find interestingly, it seems that this is the approach that most people, at least in our chat, are interested in,
Yeah.
the metaphysical approach, which is not something that you get easily. It's the most difficult one also, I would say. It's the least familiar and it requires some study and some investment.
I
But
think
that's
it's important to have this. We need to have a clear mental structure, a clear setting, a clear mental set,
yeah,
and
I think so.
a mental framework to have this, and we cannot just keep claiming, oh, well, I like this because this is beautiful. No, we need to, and we cannot claim the definition of beauty, but we can do a lot of other things, and lectures like this and positions like the one that Alex has been explaining is necessary to be understood and to be.
Yeah. So my next research is on the metaphysical approach, which is the one I'm mostly interested. I'm more interested in personally. Even though in this lecture I hope I was not partial. I try to give a fair presentation of all the outlooks, and yeah, hope to see you then.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you. Thank
Bye,
you for
guys.
being here.
Cheers.
Well, I mean, does anyone have a question? Want to bring your project or something like that? Other than that, I have published in the group for those speaking Spanish. There is tomorrow at 10 o'clock London time, which I think is something like midday in Mexico. There is another event that Inbound Mexico is organizing. They have invited me to give a lecture. It's going to be in Spanish, but it is in the WhatsApp group if you want to join and listen to us tomorrow at 10 o'clock London time. But until then, I remind you, I mean, we don't have slides today, but there is this competition for the redesign of the loop. Go to traditional architecture, and then I mean we have published it on the WhatsApp group. Let me just check the link. Institute of Traditional Architecture. Yes, Institute of Traditional Architecture. They have. I'm going to share it in the. Let me just share the screen quickly. So Institute of Classical Architecture, I think that they have the competition for the, yes, correct. Here it is, they have the competition for the new entrance to the loop. So you can register, they have several prizes, and the registration deadline is on the 1st of December. So you still have your time to register and join. So yes, it's 10 p.m. London time. So I think it's like midday or early afternoon. And then, yeah, there will be, I know that we had a calendar that we were going to go up to the end of November in our in our lectures and our calendar, but life is changing. I have trips and travels. So next week on the 22nd is going to be our last session of the year. We will be covering the classical survival, so classes between the end of the Second World War and 1972. And we will see why it is 1972. Most of you may already know why it is 1972. And we will announce the next season, which will be about Islamic architecture, starting in January. So we will get all that. It will be very similar to the program we did in at the beginning of the year. So it will be around 12 sessions, and they will be covering topics. It will be mostly Western Islamic. So we will have, for example, we will have one lecture only for the mosques of Cordoba, another lecture only for Madinat al-Sahara, and so on and so on. So it will be mostly Umayyad, Abbasid, and then Western. We will have glimpses, a little bit of Persian and Middle East in general, a little bit about Mughal, but it won't be as detailed as the Western. So we will reframe it as Western Islamic architecture, which is an integral part. I mean, we will be seeing a little bit, it's a continuation of the architecture of late antiquity. But until then, I mean, the recording will be, I will try to upload now the recording to YouTube. So if any of you want to watch it, and then, yeah, if you don't have any more questions, we will make it a day and we will stop here. Perfect.
Just, I don't have any questions. I think that it will be interesting to see if in the future, like people as interesting as you or Dr. Burras and that are very well educated on this will try to get in contact with people like Jonathan Payot, because he actually did an interview the other day with Jonathan Andrew Gold. I think I mentioned that architect, and he is actually really interested in the ideas of Christopher Alexander and neo urbanism. So it will be great for the movement if you try. If someone that is a good representative could could maybe have a conversation, because he's interested.
Do you have his contact details?
It's on his page, and he's
Okay.
very accessible from what I know.
Okay. I'll try to write him. I'll try to write him. I think obviously, yeah, I'll try to write him. It's always good to know how the people make approaches. I was taking a quick look when you mentioned him earlier, and I think he looks like a very interesting person, someone worth knowing. I mean, especially, I mean, I'm interested.
And one of the most interesting things about him is that, and I think that's one of the biggest green flags of anyone today, is that he's not into politics. He doesn't care about politics. So
That's important.
that's one of the best. That's one of the green flags I look for people, that you're interested in conversations or ideas or in ideology. So if you're interested in ideology, I'm not that big into that. So,
I
but
think that's a very good
he's really
approach.
interested. He's really interested in new urbanism, and I think it will be great publicity for anyone that can get a hold of him.
Okay, I mean, we'll contact him. I think that you know that there is always this conflict between new urbanism and proper good urbanism. Without wanting to criticize my colleagues that are into new urbanism, is that sometimes the framework, the way new urbanism has evolved, it has forgotten the architecture. It just thinks that the plan is going to solve everything and that the regulations are going to solve everything. And usually they forget or they don't care about the result. They just think that the plan works, that the numbers work, and because the numbers work, it's worth. And sometimes we need.
Actually, for students here, that's one of the biggest discussions of new urbanism, that we want to do traditional architecture, but a lot of the students seem to not be that interested in new urbanism, because for them it feels like a fake approach,
Yeah,
like the type of things that doesn't solve the problems and the actually deep issues that we need to be attacking.
I think it was something that was necessary to have. It has helped a lot, but at the same time, it needs to be understood in its context. New urbanism, it's very difficult to export outside the United States.
And sorry for the looks,
You're
it's freezing
very
here.
cold.
It's It's freezing here. It was snowing the other day. Yeah, so if anyone wants to come to Notre Dame, have that in mind. It's freezing here half the year. So the other day, Liam O'Connor was here. He was the House Prize this year.
Yeah.
His conference was deeply inspiring because I think he understands that the problem is not only knowing how to do stuff, but actually doing it as it should be. His projects were impeccable not because he's a good designer in the traditional sense, but he actually executes in the traditional sense. And that's the
So
problem that a lot of students have.
you have to say about Liam O'Connor that normally his clients never complain because they are dead.
No, he actually.
That's memorials. I always say that he's very lucky because he never has to deal with clients.
Yeah, that's really funny. But he seemed like a really nice
He's
guy.
lovely. He's a lovely person. A lovely person.
And he was making this he was talking about this visit he did here to one of the riots that wanted to turn it bring down a memorial to General Lee.
Yeah.
In Virginia, I think it was.
Yeah.
And it was really funny because he said that basically he went to these rioters and asked, "Why do you want to bring this statue down?" Because I'm an architect that do memorials. I want to know why you want to destroy memorials. And the guys couldn't answer anything coherent of why they were trying to destroy the thing. And he made a proposal for them that do your own memorial of the things that you like and you want to society to look.
Yeah.
And value. And they just went blank and went back to just rioting.
I think that's interesting, and but again, I think you have made very, very, very interesting reflection on ideas versus ideology. I mean, a memorial is usually not commemorating an ideology; it's commemorating an idea. Then we can agree if the idea is good or bad, and why is that person being remembered for. And I mean, I think that it's a bit like that meme that you see from time to time, that you see like two Americans complaining, "Oh, that general said something that I didn't like 200 years ago. Let's stand down the statue." And then you see two Europeans. That king was a huge piece of, excuse my French, shit. I like the statue. So I think that that's a bit the approach. But no, I mean it's interesting, and I think it joins a little bit with the idea of new urbanism. If it to which extent, I think it's something that is necessary. I mean, from time to time, we get people in Spain that they start getting interested in new urbanism, and I said, what is what you want to do with new urbanism? What is what you want to do? Because in an European context, there are things that are not that. I mean, we have reached now to the point in which it is that the new urbanist approach is slightly starting to be something to consider because we are starting to get problematic with the urban sprawl. But and one of the students in this year in the academy, Ricardo, was addressing that of how to manage urban sprawl from the urban sprawl itself, as opposed to the no, you deny, you don't, we omit the urban sprawl from the equation. That sometimes some people say, no, that is worthless. We just remove the no. I mean, you need to live with that. So, and then I mean, I think that it's interesting. It makes an interesting approach, but there are things that it's a bit reinventing the wheel, and it is necessary to reinvent the wheel in a country that has forgotten what a wheel is. In the case of United States, even everything goes on wheels, while you would get if you start reading all the I mean I'm talking about the ones I know, the Spanish regulations on urbanism, they are very I mean I remember I was reading the last one, the lista ley de impulso de la sostenibilidad del territorio de Andalucía, with like very long flamboyant names, and it was looking and when I was reading it was like if I was reading the art of classic planning, because it's not telling you do house money and grids, but all the other things they were very, very in line with that. Why? Because they are universal principles that are common and that people know they work. In the United States is because in the 60s, which is something that we have commented a lot, no, how And the United States reinvented itself after the Second World War, created a mythology on itself that never existed. And it's very interesting if you see documentaries from the 1950s, especially, they were on one side saying explicitly saying that they were reformulating the whole identity, and on the other, it was the government doing two things at the same time, reformulating the identity and at the same time warning about that reformulation, especially with the urban sprawl. There is a couple of documentaries that are like warning about, like, it was the government warning about that. So I think that there is a lot of things that I think it's what we were saying. I mean, you have erased the knowledge. People are thinking that they have rediscovered the wheel, but there are things that have always been there, and they need to be taken. They just need to be admitted what they are. They have always been there.
Yeah, and coming back to the comment that you were saying about the difference between the Americans about thinking about the past and the Europeans, uh, I think that one of the interesting things that happened with Jordan Peterson is that he brought back this interest in the Bible, and that's why biblical literacy is important for any society, because even the biggest critics in the 20th and 19th century actually understood what they were criticizing. Now nobody understands anything, and this guy Peterson took a lot from this literary critic that focused a lot on the Bible, the Canadian critic Northrop Frye, and he has a series of lectures of how the Bible is this big pillar for Western literature since the beginning. But the point is that it, the Bible teaches you how to think about morally repulsive persons, and how that is not equal to trashing them and forgetting the good parts of the past and the traditions. Because I mean, you take someone like King David; it's a moral, reprehensible person, but that's not the point of what he's valued in his life. And the Bible doesn't hides anything of the horrible things that he did.
Yeah,
But people have disconnected themselves from that, and now they think about good or bad, and in this white and blank ways of you're in my team or you're not in my team. You think the same way I think. You are in the same political party as me, and it has become tribalism because people cannot value each other beyond this blank morality that they have constructed.
that tribalism was always there. The thing is that before, because everyone was, let's say, in the Middle Ages, when everyone was Catholic and it was, or high Middle Ages, and then you have only Catholic and Orthodox. Catholic and Orthodox is like the first. I mean, you have all the big pre-wars of religions in the late antiquity, but then Catholics and Orthodox is like the first. You're us or against us. No, it's the first tribalism, and then you can say, okay, then the whole Western Europe remain Catholic, and then the Protestant Reformation comes, and then you start with the tribalism in there. It's not something new. Nihil novus sub sole, and at the same time, this the Bible has been central to the development of Europe, but the reading of the Bible by everyone is only a Protestant creation, the sola scriptura,
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
universal priesthood. Before that, and you cannot understand the traditional Christian perspective, Catholic and Orthodox, is that you need the tradition to understand it. I mean, the Orthodox stops in earlier, the Orthodox tradition stops earlier than the Catholic tradition, but both of them have a very rich common stronghold on the tradition that is necessary to understand it. So that's what I mean. We need to punctualize that. Yeah, the Bible itself needs the the whole tradition, especially in the traditional context. But I mean, it's a very valid reflection, and I think that probably we should read more the Bible in general. We are not
yeah.
in the Counter Reformation, so I think that we should all read the Bible. We will probably get some interesting ideas, and not only the proportion of the Temple of Ezekiel.
Yeah, it was the you could say the link, the cultural link. It was the religious
Yeah,
what was the cultural link for a long time. And actually, it's not that the tribalism disappeared, but at least put limits to it
correct,
a little bit.
correct.
Now it's back. Now it's back to everybody for every man for himself. it's
Uh,
other things is
I,
there.
I think we have been hearing the same thing for a long time. I think that unfortunately selfishness is connatural to human being. So
Yeah,
we are going to have to live with that no matter how.
but the finalizing what I was saying is that I think a lot of the young people understand the issues. They just need a lot of a lot of guidance from the right people to not fall in traps
Yeah,
that are being laid out right now by a lot of propaganda.
correct. There is that's true. There is a lot of traps going around, but at the end of the day, that's what you how you find what I mean. That's part of the journey. We all fall in traps, and that's well part of the human experience and the human nature to fall and then to get redeemed. And I'm starting to look like a priest from the pulpit. But anyway, gentlemen and
A
ladies,
little bit.
thank you very much for having been here today. Thank you for your question. I think it has been very interesting. I think I need to bring Alex more because you have been much more proactive with him than in other lectures. So I'm very happy because I think that his point of view is very necessary. I think that that's why I wanted to bring him because I have a lot of discussions with him and say, look, Alex, you need to come and talk about all this because it's necessary that we shatter our own minds and we think from that perspective. And I mean, I would like, as part of a longer discussion, I mean, I don't know if Sohaib is here. I know that you, Amar, are here with us. I think that eventually I would like you guys who come from the Islamic perspective to see what you think, to read your own, to read the Quran, to read the foundational text of the Islamic religion, and see what you find there, because it is a very rich. It's very rich in philosophy. It's very rich in ideas, and I think it will be very interesting to find which are the parallels or the non-parallels to what Alex is saying. It will be very interesting to see all that. So it's something. It's an invitation that I do to you guys to research on that sense, because it's also part of your culture, and it's part of the way, if you want to bring back the tradition, you cannot bring back our tradition. You need to bring your tradition, which is part of the lovely adventure.
Just a small note
Yes.
regarding the Islamic perspective.
Yeah.
I understand that perhaps in Christianity they had the opportunity with the Protestants basically to read the Bible in their own interpretation. But when it comes to Islam, Sunni side, the Sunni or the Shi'i side, the the idea is that if you want to understand the Quran, you should have an extremely well-knowledged scholar to decipher it, because according to basically Islamic principles, it's very difficult to come up with the lines of the Quran. So for you to understand it, you have to be basically the top of the top. The good thing about where I live is that we have both Sunni and Shi'i sects and scholars and their students. So thank God I have access to that. But in regards to the philosophy, I'm going to probably have to go to schools, I guess, go to Cairo, go to Iran, go to we'll have to see, honestly. We'll see. But hopefully, if I get the bare minimum, why not? Absolutely. I'll be more than happy to. Absolutely.
I think it will be very interesting to see all that, obviously from our lack of knowledge, and I think that it will be good if you contact Sohaib from Pakistan. He is more into all that philosophy, etc. I think you will like him. I will give you the contact details. But until then, gentlemen and ladies, thank you very much for being here. We'll see you next week at the same time for our season finale, and we will see you again in January. But until then, it's just a week, and we'll see you soon. Thank you very much, and good night. Night night. Bye bye.